It's my pleasure this morning to introduce Professor Jan Thomas, who's Vice-Chancellor and President of the University of Southern Queensland. I think most of you would know Jan and be very well aware that she's also Chair of the Regional Universities Network. I had a little chat with Jan just beforehand, and she said there was no need for me to go through all of that biography, which you can read in the programme. No, she said she doesn't want. And I said, well, maybe you'd like me to tell the audience something interesting about you then instead. And she said, yes, she's really enjoyed the conference, but after a week of travelling, she's very much looking forward to getting home, where she will be riding tomorrow morning as she is learning to rein horses. So if you'd like to know a little bit more about that, I'm sure Jan will be very happy to talk to you during morning tea. But without further ado, I would like you to welcome Professor Jan Thomas to the stage. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you very much for that. That's better. I can see you now instead of a microphone. Thanks. What happens when you choke the keynote speaker before they start speaking? It's like
You get Father Bonko.
Thank you very much. My presentation is coming up, and I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this beautiful part of Queensland, the Darumble peoples. I hope I've pronounced that correctly, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. And I think it's actually a really good point that you make around our particular role in Elders of the Future, and hopefully we're walking with them in the journey of reconciliation. I'm speaking to you today as Chair of the Regional Universities Network. That's the group responsible for this conference, in case you hadn't worked that out. So I just thought a quick recap on RUN might be useful. These are the universities, and our network doesn't speak for the Australia's 7 other nationally headquartered, regionally headquartered universities, but of course they do share similar issues and interests with us, and we speak quite regularly with them over issues that might affect their particular regions of Australia. As you probably also know, this is where we're physically located. Most of our 6 members have campuses and study centres throughout the east of Australia, except in the instance of CQU, where is also in South Australia and increasingly in Western Australia. And I think importantly, 4 of our number also cater for large proportions of students who study away from campus. For my own university, some 70% of our students, 28,000 or a bit more than that in number, 70% of those study online, which is quite a large proportion comparatively. I don't want to dwell on this too much, but just in case people are new to this conference, a little bit more about RUN here. Our purpose is essentially to advocate for regional Australia and to collaborate for the betterment of the regions. And together, the combined revenue and assets of the RUN universities exceed that of many metropolitan universities, and our total contribution to Australia's economy is quite significant. In fact, it's about equivalent to that of the country's fishing industry, and we account for about 9% of Australia's total student enrolments, with over a quarter of our students being international. And contrary to common perception, you will all know that we have no trouble at all attracting international students to our universities. Indeed, we punch well above our weight in terms of our contribution to providing opportunities for disadvantaged students as well. And we enrol about 15% of the sector's low SES students, 16% of the Indigenous students, and almost a quarter, 24% of its regional and remote students. So we really punch above our weight in terms of serving Australians to ensure they are able to reach their full potential. As well, you'll know too that there's a high proportion of our students who are mature and first in their family to attend university. So RUN universities perform a growing share of Australia's highly ranked research, much of which is undertaken in close partnership with our regional industries and communities, and which have a global relevance. And if you remember that we've only been operating as universities for most of us between 20 and 25 years, we continue to develop in that journey. We do anticipate, but by the time we're 50 years old as universities, we'll be well and truly on the international stage. 5% of Australia's total higher ed by research students study with our universities. And it's true that aside from education and research, the run universities are particularly good at playing a comprehensive role within their communities, and we contribute in a myriad of ways to regional development and wellness, and it's often not understood and understated. But that includes a broad reach well beyond our local communities, and so my university, USQ, for example, is very active across Western Queensland, and we see that as a core part of our regional mission. It's not just about the local impact of where the campus actually is. So I do want to, towards the end of my presentation, run through the RUN policy document, but before I'd just like to reiterate a theme that I'm sure will have appeared frequently as you've been speaking over the last couple of days, and that is the divide that exists between regional and urban Australia. I haven't always been an advocate of regional Australia. In fact, I was raised predominantly in Perth, and the bulk of my professional life was in Perth and in Perth-based universities. And when I became Vice-Chancellor of USQ in 2012, in fact, I had never been to Toowoomba before I signed my contract and moved. And I must admit, it was a shock to the degree in which regional universities and regional centres such as Toowoomba were marginalised in the thoughts of urban-based policy makers and commentators. I very quickly realised that anything to do with regions was based on a very outdated stereotype, and there was a total lack of understanding on what regions are and how they contribute to Australia. The uniqueness of universities like my own, like this beautiful university here, UNE, Southern Cross and so on, is not appreciated. For example, in the way I've just listed earlier around how we cater for older and more disadvantaged students. But that also such a high proportion of our students study off campus. People have failed to recognise that it was indeed the regional universities that pioneered offshore and online education in the 1980s and 1990s, when most universities were totally disinterested in these developments. In fact, that leadership has stood Australia in very good stead, and we're now reaping the benefits of that international education and our expertise in online education. To urban-based commentators, though, we're not recognised as making any particular or distinctive contribution to the sector, but just assume that we're remotely based wannabes that all hope one day to be able to leapfrog into a metro uni. Most disappointingly, I think, is that not only are capital city people ignorant of the regions, but they appear completely apathetic about trying to learn about us. They simply assume and they inevitably get it wrong. And the outcomes of that ignorance, neglect and apathy and the lazy policies that arise from them are clearly evident when we look at educational outcomes for people living in regional areas. You'll know this data too, but in 2015, the proportion of persons aged 25 to 34 with year 12 or above was only 80%, was over 80% in major cities, compared with around 61% and 64% in regional Australia. The lower, becoming lower as the further away from a metro city you become. Regional Australia is also characterised by lower rates of higher education participation than in capital cities. 2015, the proportion of 25 to 34-year-olds with bachelor degrees or above in major cities was about 42%, while it was less than half of this in regional Australia at 18 to 21%, again becoming lower the further away you get from the big cities. Of course, this is not only an important equity issue for the individuals concerned, but it has very, very real implications for the economic development and future sustainability of regional communities. Is there any wonder that, that the regions are fed up and are demanding change? You may be aware that since April the 1st, News Corp have been running a Fair Go for Regional Australia campaign. In fact, just this morning on ABC 24, I saw the editor in Townsville present the reporter with a T-shirt on Fair Go for Regional Australia. Yeah. In their words, this is to keep countryside communities front of mind for policymakers, and I really applaud this initiative. And it's clearly plugged into the sentiment of regional Australia. For example, if you're watchers of the ABC Q&A program, you'll know that there have been several instances recently where regional Australians have made their feelings felt in no uncertain terms about Australia's urban-regional divide. With regard to higher education, the demand-driven system has enabled large numbers of students to attend university, encouraged new courses to be rolled out, and has been associated with an increase in proportion of low SES students at university. However, the overall proportion of regional students attending university continues to be a concern, and it's still work that we have in front of us. While critics of regionally based higher education like to point to the continued disadvantage of regional students as an indicator of the lack of success or lack of impact of regionally headquartered universities, I say to them, how much worse would it be if regional universities were not operating? It's not unexpected, of course, that advantaged student groups will take advantage of the opportunities that are available to them more quickly than a disadvantaged student group may. The fact that as the sector has grown, the proportion of regional students has kept pace is a testament to the efforts of all the universities working in regional Australia. And that's on the background of extreme policy neglect by people in Metro Australia. A much stronger policy framework is needed to support regional Australia across all the sectors, but including and in fact foregrounding the role of education in that. The first and most fundamental requirement for the development of regional Australia is that our views be taken far more seriously than they are at present. Just yesterday I said to a crowd in Brisbane that there is this assumption in Brisbane that there's no intellectual life west of Moggill, and I suspect the response I got after making that comment shows that to be true, because I had people say, is there life west of Moggill? Consider this example. You'll all be familiar with Campus Morning Mail. Well, on the 15th of June, just a little while ago, the edition in the newsletter that day had this to say about this gathering, all of us here today. It looks like the Regional Universities Network Conference will stick to the standard call used by generations of Bush advocates. Ask not what your country can do for the nation, but what the nation can do for the country. But what's in it for the tax-paying city folk? Well, it's a fair enough question, albeit reminiscent of the famous bemoaning of Monty Python's John Cleese, when he, of course, said, "What have the Romans ever done for us?" Well, here's my response. First of all, Australians living outside the mainland capital cities make up almost a third of Australia's population, and it's worth remembering that us bush folks pay taxes as well, and we also vote. Secondly, here's what Australia outside the capital cities represents to Australia. As I've already said, around 30% of the nation's population lives outside the metropolitan areas, and despite common misconceptions, non-metropolitan populations are growing overall. In particular, outside of the mainland capitals, there are 31 small cities with a population greater than around 40,000 that are diverse, growing and highly productive networks of urban areas. They are already home to 4.5 million people and contribute 15% to the national economic activity, as well as being the service hubs for the majority of regional Australians. Small cities are where regional universities, including the run universities, are headquartered, and where regional branch campuses are located. Analysis from the Regional Australia Institute indicates that small cities have been catching up to our major cities in productivity terms, now achieving 88% of the productivity of the 5 big cities in Australia. Our small cities are outperforming the economic growth rates achieved by our major cities between 2002 and 2010. This demonstrates their potential contribution to future national economic performance. In addition, not widely recognised, regional economies are based on a diversity of industry sectors, with the majority of employment concentrated in the services, health, education and infrastructure sectors. Regional Australia is the major source of Australia's export earnings, accounting for 67% of the value of Australian exports. Regional Australia plays a critical role in the Australian tourism industry, which makes a direct contribution to Australia's GDP of $35 billion annually. Around 45% of tourism expenditure occurs in areas outside of Australia's capital cities. Very importantly, regional Australia holds the key to a sustainable future for Australia. It is where solutions can be found to key national and global challenges such as food security, biodiversity, climate change, water solutions, preservation of Indigenous cultures, Indigenous economic development and social inclusion. Regional Australia is also the key to relieving some of the major challenges now confronting metropolitan Australia. It can readily be said that Australia's overpopulated big cities are in danger of collapsing under their own weight. The most recent population estimates by the Bureau of Statistics shows that 9.3 million people live in Sydney and Melbourne alone, or 4 in every 10 Australians. It's very uncommon for just 2 cities to account for such a large proportion of the population in the country. IMF figures show that Japan's 2 largest cities, Tokyo and Yokohama, account for less than 10% of the country's total population, while London and Birmingham, Britain's 2 biggest cities, make up less than 20% of the population. Do we really believe that the current situation in Australia can continue? Housing affordability, congestion, pollution, crime and public safety, and a growing disparity between inner cities haves and the outer suburban have-nots make this situation unsustainable, and it simply isn't necessary. Ensuring robust development of regional Australia provides the basis for relieving the pressure on our capital cities by providing attractive alternatives for people to live that are safe, affordable and connected. The flexibility provided by the digital technology and the internet means that businesses can be conducted anywhere. Well, perhaps not anywhere yet, but that should be the policy objective. There is simply no reason to continue the base policy on stacking Australians one on top of the other in our capital cities. An investment in promoting decentralisation will pay for itself in many ways. Recent analysis from the Regional Australia Institute indicated that as Australia confronts the challenge of a 40 million population, for every 100,000 Australians who choose to live in growing small cities rather than our big 5, it is estimated that an additional $50 billion will be released into the economy over 30 years in reduced congestion costs and increased consumption. We need to bust the stereotype that movement out of the capital cities is akin to forcing people to live in third world environments. We need to stop speaking in terms of moving to the bush, or even making reference to sea changes or tree changes. In most cases, decentralisation is about a city change, and the problems of the capital cities, particularly housing affordability, have been providing a push factor for people to move into the regions for some time already. Thankfully, the Coalition's Smart Cities Plan that was released by the Turnbull government for public consultation in late April has finally seen a recognition of the importance of regional Australia beginning to be factored into the national policy thinking. This must continue as the benefits for Australia's economic future of healthy regions are clear and demonstrable. Hence the title of the Run policy document, Clever Regions, Clever Australia. I know you've all got a copy of that in your yellow bag. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. It is to provide advice to the incoming government, and it would be really great if you could read that and understand. I'm a big fan of the barbecue chatter, and if each of you spoke to 10 people around the barbecue between now and the elections, that's actually quite a lot of people. So because this is all in the book, I'm only going to skim through it, but just to overview it essentially, it provides a policy plan, a frame that looks at the principles as they apply to regional universities. We're looking to seek support for policies that assist universities in their role in promoting regional development through the enhancement of human capital, through research and innovation, and through services to our communities and our nations. In terms of the specifics, we talk about regional development and the role of regional universities in developing their communities. A holistic, joined-up approach should be adopted that relates to relevant government policy and funding. Universities are infrequently at the table when regional development is discussed, and regional development money is not accessible by regional universities. Why not? The Regional Australia Institute has proposed a small cities deal policy to focus and coordinate efforts to develop our small cities. And another model that's been applied in the UK is the local enterprise partnerships, where partnerships between business and local authorities in a region are facilitated by government. They are led by business but have mandatory high-level university representation, and that's something that we might need to look at here. Teaching and learning, as for all university education, this has to have sustainable funding to adequately support our students. And bearing in mind the thin markets that we operate in and the educational disadvantage many of our students come to us with, that is even more expensive, but we do a jolly good job with what we have, and that must continue. We must accept that there is a cost premium associated with the level of support that our universities provide to our students. We therefore really strongly oppose any reduction in base funding, the second part of that is that we must absolutely demand that the demand-driven system continue. Regional Australians have not yet had the opportunity to reach parity with their metro cousins, and making sure that the demand-driven system is available to facilitate regional students to be able to actively participate in university will take years before we get to that point. As you know, most of our universities will be working with 8, 9 and 10-year-olds. This takes a long time to roll out and to raise aspiration and to reach parity, and the demand-driven system is absolutely fundamental for that to continue to support that initiative. We also consider that there's an opportunity for effective distribution of Commonwealth postgraduate places, and it might be that there is some facility around market need, particularly regional markets in that space. We're also very committed to supporting future student success and make sure that we have access to youth allowances and higher education loan programs continuing that won't disadvantage our particular student cohorts. It is absolutely critical that maintaining a robust and dynamic regional campus is essential to counter the brain drain from regional communities and to build the regional economies. We know, you know, that 75% of students who are educated in the region will remain as professionals in the region, building that rich fabric of professional life over the whole of Australia. We, of course, also are very concerned about the recent cuts in help in HEPPP funding. We know that the pathways and preparatory programs that we all offer for our students are absolutely critical. It is more expensive to teach students that are underprepared than it is to teach, say, for example, my children who are students at universities. My children would study pretty much and be successful in pretty much any learning environment. But you know that's not the case for the students that come to our universities in the main. We're calling for a really mature discussion on issues such as, this lingering perception of higher education as in the bygone age, the vice-chancellors that kind of, mourn for the good old days when universities were just elite systems and students were very easy to teach. In fact, they were almost incidental in the scheme of things. We also have particular statements that relate to infrastructure, international students and research. International students, there's no reason why Australia can't look to seeing how additional bonus points might be applied to Australian residency if they've studied in regional areas in areas of regional skills need. We would call for extended work rights for international students at regional universities and providing scholarships through AusAid for regional universities. We also believe that regionally based research and innovation is absolutely critical to continue to drive that diverse economy that we have in regional Australia, and there's a whole range of strategies within the document that detail that as well. So, to conclude, a feature of the next phase of Australia's economy and our economic story as a nation needs to be the development of our regional cities. We need our regional cities to be dynamic and successful so that we have a rich tapestry of locations where Australians live across our great nation, not all focused on the 5 major metropolitan cities. We need that to secure our future, and regional universities have a very major role to play in these developments. I hope that all parties will consider the issues and policies raised in the Run Policy Plan and consider them without any prejudices or preconceived views of what regional Australia actually is. And that's not only in the context of next week's election, but also in years to come. Thank you very much.